infinite capacity to problem solve has led us to develop the Shark Slider Nano, providing you with minimum form factor, flawless bi-directional 2-axis camera movement. Precision gesture control technology provides fast, accurate, reliable, and repeatable track movement, perfect for both interior and exterior location work. Minimum power consumption, exceptional runtime, and USB-C charging means you'll never miss a shot. Flexibility is key. Operate using either our IPS touchscreen or our standalone app. The Nano turns your smartphone into a powerful motion capture device packed with tons of features. The Shark Slider Nano. Dependable camera movement, whenever and wherever you need it.
Give me that microphone!
Hello everyone, welcome back to Pro AV Live. It's been a little while since we've done one of these, so if I'm a little bit rusty, please forgive me, please stay with me. I've also just been on holiday as well, so that probably won't help my rustiness. But we are doing Canon in Motion this month, which is a huge month through all of June of Canon promotions, Canon content, Canon deals, all of that sort of stuff. Basically, we are working with Canon to just up everything that we do about Canon. And so as part of that, we're doing a bunch of these live streams, the first one of which obviously is this today. So I am joined by the lovely Mehdia from Canon UK, who is going to talk us through a bunch of cameras and hopefully answer some of your questions. Thank you so much for joining me in person for this one, which is a nice little change, isn't it? How are you?
Good afternoon, everyone. Yeah, it's different, but I'm pretty sure it would work much better than me sitting in the office somewhere and then you being here. Yeah.
So for those watching at home that maybe don't watch this normally, you might not notice that literally everything is different. Not just visually, our setup is different, the desks are different, the kit is different, everything. Behind the scenes as well, pretty much every single piece of kit that we're using is entirely different. And in the next stream, the multi-camera one, I'm actually going to talk you through a little bit of what we're doing here and how we're doing it. But for this stream, particularly, obviously everything is brand new and this is the first time we're using any of it properly live. So if you notice anything, any technical issues, anything like that, please do let us know. It is so unbelievably useful. We have noticed a couple ourselves just before going live that we didn't have time to fix. For example, there's some slight noise floor issues with some of the mics. So we're already aware of that one and we're going to try and fix them for next time. It's what happens when you go to a completely new setup with so many different pieces of kit involved, unfortunately. But if there's any more particularly ones that we can solve on the fly, please do let us know. So the vague structure for this, obviously the topic that we're going to discuss is which EOS camera, so not cinema, I nearly said cinema EOS, but not which cinema EOS, which EOS camera as a whole is for you. So that encompasses pretty much everything that Canon make. But we are going to go through a pick of sort of highlights of the products. That's told you I was rusty. A curated selection of Canon cameras rather than all of them. Just we've picked out the ones which we think are the most relevant to Pro V customers. What are the cameras? Let's list them first, shall we?
So on the EOS R system, we're starting with the R7. Mm-hmm. Which literally only announced last month.
Brand new. I haven't tried one yet.
So
I haven't touched it.
It is the latest addition to the EOS R system cameras. We'll cover the R5 as well. Mm-hmm. Again, it's been very popular for stills and video. The R3, which mm-hmm. is an amazing camera on stills, but it has amazing capabilities on the video side as well. And then we move on to the cinema EOS range. We'll cover the R5 C, C70, and then C300 III and C500 Mark II.
Lovely. So we've got a very simple PowerPoint presentation from the normal Canon slides of the key features of each one. So we're just going to very quickly go through the main headline features of each of those cameras, what sets them apart from the other cameras that we're discussing, and then try and break down a little bit as to who's using that camera, where Pro V see it being sold to the most in different sectors of the market, if you like. Try and pick apart a little bit. So if you have any thoughts on any of the cameras as we go through, please leave them in the chat. For example, Sengoa says, hello from Uganda. Hello, Sengoa. And I can bring up any questions like I just did up on the screen as we go. We'll then do a much bigger Q&A session at the end of the stream once the PowerPoint's done. So we'll do a quick grounding on each of the cameras, just to recap and refresh people's memories, and then we'll go on to do a much more in-depth Q&A question on anything that you guys want. So I see a question from Julian already, which we're going to get to in that Q&A session at the end. Thank you for the question, Julian. So let's just get cracking, shall we? Let's get started. What are we looking at first?
Okay, so we're starting with the EOS R7. So as I said, this is very, very new. Mm-hmm. I literally only had probably about 5 minutes with this camera. But so the EOS R system cameras that we're covering today, they are hybrid cameras, but primarily for stills. Yeah. But they do have great video capabilities. That's why we're focusing on them. And then before we move on to the cinema EOS cameras. So the R7 does have a newly developed APS-C sensor. Up until now, we've had full frame sensors on all the EOS R cameras. The EOS R7 and 10 are the first ones with an APS-C sensor. 32.5 megapixels for the R7. Dual pixel CMOS AF2, so those familiar with the autofocus on the R5. And particularly with the R3, when we added the vehicle tracking. So the R7 does actually benefit from all those options. And with the tracking as well, you have so for people, you've got eye, face, head and the body. Same for animals. And then for vehicle tracking. Video, you're looking at 4K 30, which is actually oversampled from 7K sensor. We also have the 4K standard up to 60, no crop, so it does use the full width of the sensor. You do have obviously the 4K option up to 60 with crop if you need that zoom or magnification. It does have a dedicated movie stills rocker switch, which means you can switch from manual into AV TV, even in the video side. And then to give you that 4210-bit, you do have C-Log 3 and HDR PQ.
So I find this a really fascinating camera because in many ways this is really quite high end in terms of, 4K 30p oversampled from 7K, C-Log 3 recording. What differentiates this apart from the size of the sensor, obviously APS-C versus full frame, from cameras like the R5?
What you have is with the R5, you do have the option to record all eye or IPB. With this, obviously, we need to consider the memory cards because you're looking at SD cards rather than the CF card option with the R5. So you do have IPB option on this.
And no RAW, presumably.
No RAW, no.
Yeah. So IPB only, so long op recording, which is okay. Does it also have H.265? Do you know?
Yeah, so that's when you get the once you enable C-Log 3 or HDR PQ, automatically you get HEVC or H.265. Similar to with the R5.
Yes.
And the R6.
Yep.
And then obviously the other thing is you do have that multifunction shoe. So in a way, this is an advantage over the R5 because you do have the new shoe that allows you to use the Tascam XLR adapter.
Yes.
For professional audio.
This is huge because the R5 and the R6 don't have this. I guess they came out just slightly too early for you guys to be ready with the technology, which is a real shame. But that's fantastic. So now it's the R3, the R5 C, the XF605, and the R7 and the R10. Does the R10 have it as well?
Yes.
It does.
And then you don't have that limit of the 30 minutes limit that we have on the R5 and the R6 primarily because obviously that limit now has been removed.
Yep.
But obviously cameras that existed before then, they still have that limit.
Yes.
Both the R5 and the R10, the R7 and the R10 don't have that 30 minutes limit.
Any record time limit. And have you noticed any overheating issues or anything like that, or had any fed back to you?
At the moment, no.
Okay.
But hopefully, once I get my hands on the camera and do more testing, then I'll be able to
try it.
Yeah, because of the lower bit rates options, that should allow users to actually record for longer. And then obviously SD cards. CF Express tend to overheat. SD cards, you don't usually have that option. And then you do have different ways of monitoring the camera's temperature as well, so avoid those issues, so it should be fine.
So we've had a question from Loom TV on lenses saying, is there an EFS 17 to 55 equivalent for RF mount in the works to suit that Super 35 or APS-C sensor a little bit better? You released some APS-C
so the 1755 EFS is the 2.8.
2.8 one, yes.
So not yet, but hopefully now we've started the APS-C and the RFS range.
Gotcha.
Hopefully it's one of the lenses that we probably see in the future.
So if in case people missed this in that announcement, it wasn't just about the cameras, was it? There was also the new RFS. Which is the equivalent of the EFS technology. So purpose-built lenses for the same mount, but will only work on the APS-C sized sensors, which is interesting. But there's two.
But then again, you can two, but you can still use the adapter and use EFS lenses.
Yes.
Obviously,
good point.
the performance 1755 has been around for a number of years.
Yes.
So maybe, but then again, we've seen that some of the EF lenses perform better on the EOS R system cameras.
Yeah.
So it's definitely worth testing it on the camera once it's out.
Yeah. And in terms of the two, I mean, we've only got a slide here on the R7, which I think is a really interesting camera, and I think will be. I said we'd talk a little bit about the markets of each of these cameras. It's obviously too early to tell on this one. We have had quite a bit of interest in it, mainly from solo operators who are wanting a B camera for a wide variety of Canon cameras, actually. Nearly all Canon people already that are wanting to add one of these to their kit. Some have, from R5 C, even upgraded as recently as that. Some that are established C300 owners, for example, that just want a little small B cam. They were always toying with the idea of the R5, the R5 C, the C70 as a B camera for their bigger cinema EOS camera, but it was always a little bit too high for them on the price point, considering they just wanted something with some stills capabilities and a second camera angle for some interviews that do a very simple job. And I think this is going to tick the boxes for that kind of customer absolutely brilliantly.
For the price that it is, and then obviously, which I forgot to mention, is you can do full HD up to 120.
Yeah.
Obviously, it's not 4K 120, but still full HD up to 120, which is great. So you do have, as a video camera, it does actually allow you to get a lot from a smaller, and then it is smaller and lighter. For those familiar with the 90D, it's actually even lighter than the 90D.
Yep. I mean, if you are really on a budget, in the pro video terms, on a budget, wanting a camera from you guys, actually this gives you a lot for your money in some ways. With a little Tascam box on it, it's the same size sensor effectively as the C70. This is a sort of mini C70 if you like it to be, for half the price. I mean, it's not as good as the C70. That's not what I'm saying before anyone jumps on me. But, the people that can't reach that price point because, the C70 is a $4,000 camera or whatever it's at nowadays. This is going to be much more reachable for students, for people like that are just starting out and wanting to get as capable a camera as possible. I think it would be a brilliant choice.
It is. As I said, as long as obviously it's about managing the expectations, because it's still, yes, it's a hybrid camera, but it's primarily for stills.
Absolutely.
You don't have the fan system like with the R5 C and other cinema EOS cameras.
Yep.
So it's not like you're going to be recording for hours and hours.
Yep.
So as long as you keep that in mind, yes, it is a great stills and a video camera to use.
And the UI, although it has that dedicated movie stills rocker switch, it doesn't have any of the UI changes that the R5 C got or anything like that to give you the much more video-orientated menu structure. And key was the assistance tools, like having waveform while you're recording, things like that, which the Canon more stills-focused cameras are really actually, I'm sorry, not that good at. They, like histogram, for example, disappears when you hit roll, which is always frustrating for video users that are video first. So this will still have all of those things, but the pictures look good, and that's what matters to a lot of people.
Those using the R5 have managed without those,
myself included.
Yeah, there you go. So be able to do similar thing with the R7 and the R10.
In fact, Emerald Audiovisual says, I actually figure the R7 will make a reasonable B camera to an R5 C, which I think is a really, really valid point. I completely agree. As a B camera to an R5 C, yes, you've got a smaller sensor, but sometimes that's useful actually in some situations to get a little bit extra reach. Got all the same lenses. You get IBIS here, whereas you don't get IBIS on the R5 C. For those situations where that would have been useful, you can swap over to this instead. The same hot shoe mount for the Tascam units, so you can interchange between the two of them and have the same audio setup for both cameras, which is really, really useful. Presumably this has YDR? No, it won't have YDR, will it? So
no.
So matching them, but it's got C-Log 3, so you could match them with the C-Log 3. And H.265 is just as it's easy nowadays when you're on modern, like these two we've got here, the M1 Max, for example. It edits just as easily as the long GOT recording, if not easier than the long GOT recording. So, yeah, I think it would be a brilliant B camera for the R5 C. We've talked quite a bit on this one, so maybe let's move on from the R7. I think it's because we haven't actually had a chance really to discuss the R7, has it?
So moving on to the R5. So the R5 now has been around since summer of 2020.
Yes.
And still, we had a number of firmware updates that did improve basically what you get on the video side. The camera does offer 8K raw recording. You can do 8K up to 30. Same, you can do again 8K in MP4, 4K and full HD up to 120. You do have the option to do 4K or oversampled 4K on the camera. Yep. In-body IS as well, which works in both stills and video. And then you do have the option to use C-Log, C-Log 3, and HDR PQ if you want to get the 4210-bit HEVC. Got focus guide, manual focus beacon, and then you do have time-lapse option, different resolutions. You can record obviously to both cards depending on resolution. And then, as I said, with the number of firmware updates, there were options to use lower bit rates that will allow you to record for longer.
Yes.
Because initially, obviously, there was the overheating
yes.
that restricted how long you can record for. And then with the you can record again raw externally with the Atomos as well. So again, but on the still side, it is that 45 million pixels that give you that lovely stills. Again, just to emphasize, this is primarily stills for video, although there are loads of people using it out there as their BOC cam.
Absolutely. I mean, this is a conversation we're having more and more as the years go on in recent times about the crossover between the stills and video. It always used to be lots of stills photographers had to get into the video market, but actually now we're starting to see people are so used to people doing both video and stills that a lot of the video users and creators are having to do a bit of stills as well. And so cameras like the R5, which are stills first but have incredibly powerful video in them, are very popular for that kind of customer, or as a B camera. I mean, yes, the R5 is quite an expensive camera and it's definitely a professional camera in its own right. Lots of people pick these up as B cameras because they need a good video camera and they need a good stills camera, and it's nice that they can cross over a little bit as well. That, I think, is, especially now the R5 C exists, this is now the main, for our customers, the main use for the R5 is as a really good stills camera to put alongside a really good video camera, if you're wanting that two camera system. But it can still be your B camera in interviews with the autofocus, matching with C-Log 3, all the rest of it.
Next one is the R3. We don't usually talk about the R3 video-wise, but the camera primarily, again, there's actually purchased the R3 is more for the stills capabilities because of the image quality, the speed, the autofocus. So for those sports press photographers, it's a great camera to use. But looking at the video capabilities, again, it's a great video camera to use. It was the first EOS R camera where the 30 minutes recording limit was removed. So it did, and because obviously design of the camera, it does allow you to record for longer. So you're looking up to about 6 hours of recording time, 4K resolution, and then just around a couple of hours if you're doing high frame rate. You can do 6K RAW, which is great for the camera, and that's up to 60. The 4K is oversampled from the 6K sensor, and as I said, you can do 4K or full HD up to 120, and then you do have the benefit of the C-Log 3 HDR. It does have that multifunction shoe, so you can use the Tascam XLR adapter for professional audio as well.
So there's a school of thought out there, which I'm not sure I necessarily agree with, but there is a massive school of thought out there from people that I've talked to online, that the R3 is a bit of a best of both worlds between the R5 and the R5 C, and is actually the one to go for in the middle for video hybrid users, because it's obviously an incredibly powerful stills camera. It's got the technical feature, it can't do the 8K of the R5s, but it can do 6K, which is still pretty good. It's got the Tascam of the R5 C. It's got the IBIS of the R5. It's got the battery life of probably neither of the cameras. It's way better battery life. It's got no overheating. Well, I think it does overheat if you really push it.
It doesn't have a fan,
yes,
but because of the design of the body, where actually heat goes down to the battery compartment, you can record for a lot longer than the R5. As I said, from the test we've done, 6 hours is what we say, but there are people that actually record it for longer. I mean, I don't think you'll get, probably depending on the size of the memory card and resolution you're recording, you're not going to be recording for that long continuously. I
think in practical terms, you're not going to run into overheating problems with the camera at all. I mean, I can absolutely see their point that this is sort of the best of both worlds between the two cameras. The reason I say I don't necessarily agree with it is because there are some key bits of what make the R5 C so special that this doesn't have. And for me, that comes down to the tools that are in the camera that just make your video better. Having waveform, having false color, having the quick access to the video features from that UI, particularly the little touchscreen menu UI system on the R5 C has. This doesn't have any of that, and to me, those boring tools, if you like, rather than the fancy features that you're going to notice on the final product, those boring tools make my work much better, and so I really value them when talking to customers about.
Then you have XFAVC option, obviously, on the R5 C. You don't have that on the EOS R cameras because obviously they are primarily still. So you do the best way, if you're not recording RAW, to get the 4210-bit is HEVC.
Sure. Emerald said, does the R3 have the ability of 4-channel audio recording? Which I'm not sure.
Pretty sure, yeah.
I think when you've got the Tascam adapter in it, you'll get your 2 XLRs on 1 and 2. Channels 1 and 2, and then maybe the built-in mics, or can you put
you can attach a 3.5
the 3.5 mil to split it between channels 3 and 4. Nice. And it looks like he agrees the Cine EOS is something else indeed, and he says the R5 C has the 4 channels of audio. Absolutely agree. Okay, and I think that's the camera we're moving on to next, right?
Yeah, so now we're going to look at the Cinema EOS range, starting with the R5 C. So this sits as an entry-level Cinema EOS camera. It is our full frame. It does have a full frame sensor. On the still side, as I said, this is pretty much the R5 without IBIS. So the image quality on the still side is the same. The great thing with this camera is like two systems in one body. You turn the camera on the photo side and you see the familiar menu from the EOS R cameras and digital SLRs. You turn the camera.
I've used it for stills myself personally, outside of work, just some photography job for a theatre show, for example. And I've used the R5 quite a lot for that. And I took the R5 C and didn't notice any difference whatsoever. The IBIS didn't actually even come into it, even in that darker environment. And so, yeah, you could convince people that it's the same camera, and if you don't look too closely at the extrusion from the back.
Yeah, and then obviously the red.
And the red button on the front.
So and then on the video side, you basically see the familiar Cinema EOS menu, and it's not just about the look of the menu, it's about what you get with that. And as you mentioned, with the waveform monitor, force color, getting the professional, the XFAVC option that you can get with the R5 C, similar to the other Cinema EOS cameras. I mean, with this, you've got even like time code in and out. Obviously, it does have the RF mount. You do have that multifunction shoe that we mentioned with the R3 and the R7, so you can use the Tascam for additional XLRs. We've got dual base ISO, and then obviously you do have the probably, I would say, the most up-to-date autofocus on the Cinema EOS camera.
Yes.
With the eye autofocus and intelligent face and head tracking. So it does have, technically, you can say that it does have the best autofocus in any other Cinema EOS camera we have in the range. Yes. Plus, it's smaller, lighter. It's only like 30 grams. heavier than the R5, and that's pretty much because of the fan that's been added. Takes the same battery, but the great thing is you can power it from USB power bank, or you can get mains adapter, the 2 Canon options, depending on how you're using it.
I see a lot of people using the battery banks, or V-Lock batteries, for example, which have the USB-C output. It's quite a popular one. Lots of people actually, if they tripod users, and they do quite a bit on a tripod, they have one just clamped onto the leg of their tripod, which just when they're handheld, they're off batteries, and then they put it on a tripod, they just pop the cable in the side and run off that instead, which I think actually is a really good way of not hanging extra things off the camera and all the rest of it, just practically working. Julian has just asked, what's the R5C's maximum slow motion recording speed in HD? Can you remember?
So 120.
120.
Yeah. So both 4K and Full HD is up to 120.
Perfect.
Unless you go in Super 16, where you can get 180, but...
So if you crop into Super 16, you can get up to 180 and 1080p. Okay. Very nice.
Forgot that I'm the one controlling the slides.
No, it's normally me, isn't it, when we're doing it on Skype?
So moving on to the C70. So this initially was the first cinema EOS with an RF mount. It does have the same sensor from the C300, so dual gain output sensor, meaning you get in 16 plus stops of dynamic range, better low light performance. So this is what's great about this camera for the price and the size. The design is different to the traditional cinema EOS look. It was mainly because to help those upgrading from or moving on from mirrorless and DSLRs. It's got a similar feel, but with all the professional controls and options from cinema EOS cameras.
Sure.
You do have the option to do cinema raw light that was added via firmware update. XFA VC option, MP4 again as in 422 10-bit, 420 10-bit or 420 8-bit. Got 2 SD card slots, so you can record to both, or you can record different resolutions, formats to each card. As I said, the 4K 120, or as I said, 180 in 2K. You've got mini XLRs, and then built-in NDs. And it still is not as light as the R5 C, but it's still very light compared to other cinema EOS cameras.
No, it's a really nice camera, the C70, and it's actually the Canon camera that we've sold the most of, I believe. It's a really popular choice. And I think a lot of why it's so popular is that sort of special combination of the image quality, not in terms of pixel peeping, and like the R5C has incredible image quality. This has a slightly more cinematic feel to it maybe, and I think that's probably the DGO sensor that's doing that. Really lovely dynamic range, but it goes beyond just the dynamic range. There is something about it that just feels very cinematic. I'm sure somebody like a colorist like Ollie Kensington would be able to explain it much better than I have. But there's definitely something which resonates with people about the sensor in this camera. But it's that combination of that and the practicality. It is such a practical workhorse camera. Everything's in the right place. The batteries last forever. It's got all the tools you need. It is just a workhorse camera.
It is, and it's been used either on its own as an A cam.
Yep.
It's been used as a B cam to like the C300.
Yep.
Or a C500. It's been used with the R5 C. So various ways of using the camera. And it's only a couple of £100 more than the R5 C. So for those that don't need the stills capabilities, this is another option to consider.
So that for me is the big thing when you're trying to consider between the R5 C and this is how important is stills to your work, and if it is important, can you afford to have a second camera, something like the R7 that we talked about earlier, for example, which can get you those stills, because you know this you can frame grab from video and all the rest of it, but it's not the same in any way, shape or form. So that is something that's very, very important to consider, and it is a real trick up the R5C's sleeve. It's just that it is just so good at both equally. We've had a couple of questions come in on the C70 before we move on from it. Loom TV has said, have the LCD monitors received any kind of upgrade in terms of robustness on the newer ship batches? Those first units that Canon shipped were quite flimsy and quite a lot of them
They
got
were just
broken.
the earlier ones, but now,
It got
since
fixed
then, yeah.
within
it
months,
was, yeah.
really, didn't it?
Within pretty much probably weeks.
Even.
From that, yeah.
We at launch got quite a few people coming back and saying, oh, this has already gone a bit wobbly, what's going on here? We haven't had that in a long time.
Yeah, apart from that first batch,
long time. So I would say that is definitely done. Julian asks, do you think there are any direct benefits apart from resolution for the R5 C in just video over the C70, or is it still, in your opinion, the better video camera in most ways with the DGO, dynamic range, and NDs? It's a super hard question to answer. What's the better video camera?
I mean, the
what's your
dynamic
go-to?
range pushes towards the C70, obviously,
Yes.
and then we can talk about the battery life. It's all on how you're using the camera. The built-in XLR, yes, they're mini XLRs, but they're still built in. You've got built-in NDs.
Yep.
You can get around it with the R5C using the variable ND if you're using EF lenses.
Yep.
But I think when it comes to, as I said, dynamic range, I would definitely say the C70.
Absolutely.
That's not saying that the R5C is not great. It's just a tough one deciding between the two.
So what I tend to say to people is there is no better camera. You know, they are just different. To choose which one you should buy is a very difficult choice. But really, I think it comes down to those differences and trying to really pick apart your work, how you work, to decide what is going to make you the most money. These are professional tools that are designed to be a tool that makes you money as a video creator. And so look at how you are making your money, the kind of work you're doing to make your money, and the differences in each of them that is going to have a practical effect on the happiness of your clients and therefore how much money you can make. You know, if that is the ability to produce stills just as professionally as you can video with one camera, if it is the sharpness and the small size of the camera, which gives you a really crisp, detailed picture that is very impressive actually, if it's that kind of thing that's going to wow your clients and get you more money, then the R5C is a fantastic choice. If it is how solidly you're able to just capture every single thing that happens, and you're never going to trip down in terms of battery life and that kind of stuff, your camera's not going to inconvenience you. The R5C can sometimes, because of things like battery life and stuff, be a bit of an inconvenient camera to use, whereas the C70 very rarely is inconvenient in any way, shape or form. And so things like that sometimes draw people towards the C70 in terms of, I'm just going to be able to, turn up and deliver a bit more. So I would pick apart how you're going to impress your clients and which one is going to help you do that better for you and your clients. Julian makes an interesting point there. He says, I feel I'm in the minority, but I really like having a viewfinder, even for video. I don't think you're in the minority. I completely agree. What do you think, Mehdia?
It is a tough one. I mean, yes, I've always used a viewfinder, but I think having used the C70 for a while, it's something you get used to. I mean, a C300 probably, for example, and C500, that's more where you would want to basically use the viewfinder. But I think with the C70, I think it's because obviously coming from mirrorless and dishless SLRs, the way you're holding the camera, it makes it a lot easier.
Yes.
And then the fact that you can basically tap on the screen to change your focus, it makes, there are certain things that are benefits to using the screen over the viewfinder. But yeah,
absolutely.
Having a viewfinder probably would have made the camera bigger and heavier. So these are the things that we need to look at as well when it comes to the design. So
a couple of things to point out. One, which I have a conversation with so often with customers of this cameras like the C70, is screen luminance. The amount of people that don't realize the luminance on the screen can go beyond its default 0 is, I would probably say, 70% of C70 owners. You can go into the monitoring options in the camera and plus or minus the brightness of the screen, and so you can make it a brighter screen. So if you're working outdoors and you just need to see your image a bit clearer, bump it up to +2 and you can see it a lot clearer. In terms of whether or not I prefer to use a viewfinder, it does depend a little bit on the type of work I do. I actually find for Pro AV videos, doing B-roll and stuff in here, I never use the viewfinder, ever. I always do it off a mixture of the LCD screen and an external monitor mounted off camera with a wireless transmitter, because I want to stand back and look at my picture. Whereas if I'm outside doing events, particularly, I used to shoot quite a lot of weddings, and I would use the viewfinder for 90% of that because I almost wanted them to think I was a stills photographer, and I'm pretty sure some of my customers did get confused on the day and think I was a stills shooter, because then you just disappear into the background. You can be so much more transparent when you're working up to your eye like that, like stills photographers do. Let's just have a little look at these. A couple of people are asking about the C700 lineup, which is an interesting one, which maybe we'll get onto at the end.
It's not
on the slides, no. But we might get onto that in the Q&A session. Robert also asks about the C200 and C200B are still great cameras, because that was a really interesting experiment that you guys did, of offering the same camera with and without a viewfinder. I mean, I don't think we even did the C200B over here in the UK much, did we?
No, I think the main one was the standard one, as you would expect it with the EVF. I mean, I didn't. It was tempting to add the C200. I wasn't sure where to fit it, because obviously it has been around. It's still a great camera, but it has been around for a number of years now, and a fair bit of technology has moved on. So it had great autofocus, but we've improved the autofocus since then. Internal recording formats, if you're not doing cinema raw light, 4-to-08-bit. I mean, again, it depends on deliverables, but that's all you could get with the C200, whereas with the C70, you get 4-to-210-bit internally. You do have a better sensor. So apart from the traditional look, and the SDI is a tough one. But yeah, it's still a great camera. I mean, it's still very popular in education, for example. So
yeah. I mean, I don't find. I mean, maybe rewind 6 months or so. Certainly before the C70 got its RAW update, there were times when I was recommending the C200 to people, mainly because they wanted something with image quality but on a budget. So they were basically a C300 customer. That couldn't quite afford a C300, and I would recommend them a C200. But now that the C70 can do RAW, it kind of is only the larger body and the SDI port that is a reason to go for the C200 over the C70, and the C70 has quite a lot of other strengths. So I don't find myself. I've sort of now transitioned to thinking of it as a previous generation camera rather than a current generation camera, if that makes sense. But like Robert says, they are still great cameras. I think if you own a C200 right now, I would say upgrade, obviously, because they are better. But I don't think it's a huge generational leap when you upgrade to something like a C70 from the C200, whereas it probably would have been if you had a C300 Mark II or older than that.
Yeah. I mean, as long as, I guess, despite the fact that the C200 is an older camera, if it's still doing what the user wants it to do, that is the main thing. If there are things that, I mean, the weight obviously comes into it as well. The C70 is lighter, so when it comes to using a camera on a gimbal or on drone, then you do have more options or more flexibility with the C70 with the R5 C. Maybe getting an R5 C to work with the C200. So there are
you get some of those modern advantages and keep your camera that you love. Yeah.
So there are different ways of actually using the C200 either on its own or with other cameras. So
completely agree. Okay, and we've got a couple more.
The next two, so we've got the C300 Mark III and C500. The great thing, obviously, about these two is the modular design. So from the the box that you get with the screen, you can build it up, so you can add an EVF if you want to, you can add an expansion unit if you want to use V-Logs, and that applies to both of them. You can change the mount yourself from EF to PL or vice versa with that, so there's no need to send it to a service center to do that for you. The C300 Mark III obviously has the DGO sensor, or dual gain output sensor. It was the first camera to have it, then the C70. So that means that 16 plus stops of dynamic range. So you can record Cinema Raw Light in Tandy, 2 CF Express cards, 4K 120, and then you do have the XFAVC, obviously all options. And then, as I said, you can change the mount yourself. They are smaller and lighter than the older generation. So if we were to compare it to the C300 II, this is lighter. Same goes for the C500. But yeah, as I said, when we start looking at the 300 and the 500, you start looking more at the professional connections and everything, because this is where you start seeing more of a difference. Are you using the camera on its own? Is it using a multi-camera setup? What are the benefits to all the professional terminals you have on these cameras?
Absolutely.
And then the C500 Mark II is the full frame version. So it now you can say that it is the flagship camera. So the C700 or the C700 full frame is kind of.
Well, maybe this is a good time to talk about those.
Yeah.
We did have a couple of questions. The first one I wanted to bring up was Sengoa, who said, is there any plan for Canon to go into high-end cinema cameras like Sony's Venice? I mean, the C500 Mark II is at a very different price point than cameras like the Venice or the Reds or the Arri Mini LFs. I would start to creep it into a similar territory. Certainly it's closer than the price gap would suggest that it should be, if you like, because the images out of the C500 Mark II are beautiful, and in many ways, especially if you add the extension unit on the back and the EVF, the viewfinder, the C500 Mark II does turn into a bit of a mini C700 FF, and people do use it like that for features and etc.
Yeah, I mean,
right?
the C700 full frame did obviously have the 5.9K sensor. So in terms of resolution and the size of the sensor, you're still looking at the same. Yeah. But previously, we didn't have any full frame unless you went to the C700 full frame. That's why I guess it was a big thing for us. But now, as I said, with the C500, and what you actually get with the camera, because again, similar to other high-end cameras, you buy the box and then you have to spend a lot more to get everything else to make it work. Whereas the C500 straight out of the box, it's usable. Obviously, you need a lens, but everything else is there. You've got the screen, you've got batteries and everything, and then you can build it up depending on how the camera is getting used, whether you need the expansion pack or not, whether you need an EF version, PL version. So there is a lot that this camera can do. I mean, I know there are loads of people on there. Probably, I'll be surprised if there's no one asking about the 4K 120 on the C500 Mark II. Yes. It has been a question for a number, actually, since we introduced the C300 Mark III. But it's still, as I said, it's still a great camera. The 4K out of it is oversampled from the 5.9K. So it is a better quality than a standard native 4K sensor. So these are the things that we need to look at. And you can still shoot in Super 35 if you want to, or Super 16. Said same as the C300, you've got that modular design. If you're using the there are DPs out there that they use the C500 and the C300. You can use the C500, and if you want 4K 120, you do have the R5 C. You do have the C70, so you do have more options. Yep. But there is still a mark out there for the C500 Mark II.
Absolutely. Barry's put an interesting comment, actually. It says, I know Mehdia will answer this, but Canon have no plans at this time to go down the Arri or Venice road. Sony have their own Sony pictures to really push that camera, which obviously helps a lot. I think to me it comes down a little bit to, again, who's using it, because the C500 Mark II, I think, can play with those other cameras in terms of looking like another level in terms of cinematic quality. But it's perhaps more suited to the markets that Canon has always been very traditionally strong in, the documentaries, the indie filmmakers that have to work incredibly quickly with very small little crews, sort of those narrative filmmakers that almost have to work like a documentary shoot, if that makes sense. Canon's always been very good at that. The C300 lineup has always been very popular for that. And I think the C500 Mark II just carries on that pedigree rather than bringing you into a new...
It's an easier camera to use. I mean,
Hugely.
the C700 can get, I think, I'm pretty sure most people will get their heads around it, but
Sure.
for anyone that used one or seen one, it does work differently. The menus are different. So if someone's swapping between two cameras or moving from one to the other, it's easier to pick up a C300 than switch to the C500 without having to worry about where everything is, what you need to do to change particular settings.
There are a couple of questions about the C500 actually, about are there any plans to update it? Have there been any announcements for updates to unlock cinema raw light and ProRes options and that sort of stuff? Have there been any changes to the C700 FF line, or that it's been what it's been for a bit now, hasn't it?
Yeah, so that we haven't had any changes. I mean, the C500 Mark II will get updated at some point. Keeping in mind that the cinema cameras don't get replaced as frequently as stills cameras.
Absolutely.
I'm not aware, obviously, of anything, at least not this year. But keeping in mind that the camera came out in September 2019, probably, hopefully in the next couple of years, we'll see something. I mean, probably all these upgrades or additional features that everyone wants, hopefully it will be in the newer version. But as I said, even putting that aside, it's still current, and it's still a great camera to use.
Absolutely. So let's move on, shall we, to more general Q&A questions. We've got a couple coming back, so I want to scroll back through and find one that just as we started from Julian actually, which talking a bit more about image quality in particular of the R5C. Says, apart from the sheer resolution, do you think there are any areas in which the R5C excels compared to the C70 in video qualities in terms of picture quality, or would you say the C70 wins hand down in all other areas?
Again, it's a tough one, because we'll have to be talking only video, I think, because obviously we know what the R5C does that C70 doesn't do, like with the stills. As we said. Yeah, it's a tough one. I think it comes down to how you're using it. I think maybe in particular productions where you need a very small and light camera, the R5C is significantly smaller and lighter than the C70, which is already in its own right small and light, but the R5C is even lighter. I mean,
he says apart from resolution, but to me that is the big thing. And maybe it's not about resolution, but about sharpness and detail. Because yes, it can do up to 8K, whereas the C70 can't. It's up to 4K. When you're just in the 4K modes, I think some people would assume that they would be equal because it's 4K and 4K is 4K. And that's just not true. They're very different. The R5C is a incredibly sharp camera. And people can sometimes use that as a bit of an insult. I do not mean that as an insult in any way, shape or form. I think it looks stunning. It's very, very detailed. Everything pops. Everything's very wow. Now, that's not always what you want for some projects. And there's some things where I wouldn't want that. What I love about it, particularly, we use it now a lot for our Pro AV videos because for technology videos, it's perfect. It's that pop and that extra detail. And YouTube actually does a very good job of showing it off. But if you're doing corporate films or even weddings, in weddings you might want to soften it sometimes. You don't want an over-detailed bride, for example. But those wide shots of venues and all the rest of it can really impress customers and clients, and that detail feels it's never a good thing when people feel that they can get a more detailed results out of their phone than your high-end video equipment. And those people who think that, customers, are unbelievably ill-informed. But they still think that. And so I do find a more detailed camera does keep customers happy. And the R5C has that in oodles. Whereas the C70, which is perhaps why I say people really like the cinematic quality of that sensor, it is softer. It definitely is softer. Even in the RAW, which does make it sharper, it's still a much softer camera than the R5C. But again, in some situations, that really is a strength.
It can probably come down to maybe you comparing, got full frame camera. Yes, you do have the Super 35 mode,
Yep.
where you can do 5.9K if you want to,
Yep.
on the R5 C, and then to a Super 35mm sensor
Yep.
on the C70. So that, because obviously the look is going to be different, even if we ignore the sharpness and that sort of thing, even the depth of field will look different. So these are the things, and as I said, it comes down to how the camera is going to be used,
Yes.
what you're using it for, really. Otherwise, it's a tough choice if we're just looking at the video capabilities.
Another question from HBD a little while ago now said, do you plan to add animal and vehicle recognition to the autofocus of the 1DX Mark III with a firmware update? And I think I'd expand that to be the other cameras as well, of modern cameras like R5, R6, that sort of thing. Do you know if it's a technology thing that means
We've
that they
added
don't
the
have
vehicle
them?
tracking, we've added obviously to the R5 and the R6.
True, you have.
Yeah.
There are still some bits of the R3's autofocus which they don't have, don't they? The one that always springs to mind, which I find really useful, is face detect within a zone. I believe, unless I'm using it wrong, which I might be using it wrong, on the R5 and R5 C, 6, if you want face detection, there's a whole mode for it,
Yes.
which is
different
zone.
for the R3, and it is different for the R7 as well. So
Yeah.
that tracking and the face detection and all of the detection option, you can use it across the different zones. So you've got So that's one of the advantages
of those.
that you have on the R3. And as I said, it's obviously newer cameras. Whether that's something that can be added via firmware update, not sure.
Okay.
But yeah,
I
so
would really hope so.
as I said, vehicle tracking, we added it as a firmware update on the R5 and the R6.
Sure. Now, Barry's answered some of these questions that have popped in very recently. There's been a bit of a debate here about Ernesto's comment, C-Log 2 on the R5 C, please. It would help me match my C70 a lot easier. The normal response to that, which is exactly what Barry has come in to say, is that the R5 C just doesn't have the dynamic range to make the most of C-Log 2, or properly map, not even make the most of it, to actually map C-Log 2. It's designed
correctly,
for
and
a
then
15.
you can shoot cinema raw light and use C-Log 2 if
Yes.
you wanted to
That
it.
is exactly what I say to customers.
Yeah.
You have C-Log 2 in those cameras. If you need to match one of the other cameras with C-Log 2, you've got it.
Yeah.
Shooting raw, and which is very easy to do actually, because the raw light plays back really smoothly. You can use it in all the major editing software now, and it doesn't take up too large a file sizes, so it's not actually that scary really using raw in terms of your workflow.
But then again, 14 stops with C-Log 3, it's more than
Yes.
more than enough, and it's
Yes.
a great. I mean, good dynamic range compared to other cinema EOS cameras that they are twice or three times the price. So.
Absolutely. Yep. I'm just reading the debate that's been happening and the thing about that exact issue
It's
to
a
see if I can pick
question-
out any questions.
It's a question that we've had since we launched the R5 C, is the C-Log 2. I think it's the fact that there are even other manufacturers that they use similar versions of the log curve, and they basically give you everything in there, whether it's going to make a difference or not, you have it in the camera. We chose obviously not to do it because it's not going to make a difference. The sensor dynamic range is not going to go any higher by using C-Log 2 if we had it on camera. And yeah.
Absolutely. On our earlier debate about image quality and sharpness and resolution, Robert Emmers chimed in with the counter argument for my point on detail. Is that sharpness isn't everything. I'd rather not show every blemish on a subject's face when there is no makeup artist. And let's face it, how often is there a makeup artist? We didn't go through makeup before coming in, at least I certainly didn't.
This is for the next one, I think. You need
Exactly, that's the way to improve the setup one step further. We've got new desks, now let's get a makeup artist.
Next week.
Next week. It wasn't what I meant when I said point out any technical problems. I wasn't talking about my blackheads. Was that prior? Let's see, is there any other questions? Lots of talk about dynamic range. I mean, the dynamic range is one of those things where you can debate how to get the most and dynamic range, all the rest of it. What I would say is that still a lot of people use picture profiles, log curves, and dynamic range sensors that are actually much wider and more capable than they need in most situations. The vast majority of work, you're only really going to run into that with a clipping sky in terms of dynamic range problems, even when you're debating jumping between C-Log 3 and C-Log 2 on the C70, for example. Like people not wanting to put the C70 into C-Log 3 to match the R5 C because they feel like it would be compromising their image quality. Only if you're shooting something with more than 14 stops of dynamic range in it, and not very much has that.
And where the footage is going to end up, because unless you're displaying it on a proper HDR monitor, where you're going to be able to see that difference between even like YDR. If for those that don't want to color grade their footage, YDR is a great option on there.
Absolutely.
To use.
Absolutely.
Yeah.
And actually is a really interesting point of to demonstrate what I was just talking about was what we actually do here on our channel. We used to use C-Log 3 for all of the videos that we make for Pro AV. And then I just at one point was sitting back and looking and going, why? Why am I using C-Log 3? Everything's here in this dark studio. It's all lit. What am I doing? Why am I doing this? And then I just had to teach myself to light slightly differently. And then all of a sudden, the videos became so much quicker to make. And I think arguably looked better because you can still grade C-Log YDR. Yeah. You can still push and pull it nearly as much. It's just that you're not capturing quite as much dynamic range. But if I light right, I didn't have the dynamic range to capture in the first place. And it just made life so much easier for me. And so I think a lot of it is about, there might be a bit of resurgence, I think, of shooting in good what you see is what you get picture profiles rather than log. Now that what you see is what you get picture profiles have got a bit better, because you guys have had YDR for a long time now. But with the newer generation of cameras, particularly the ones with DGO, I think it has started to look better than it ever has before. And of course, over in Sony land, it's become a big hot topic of conversation because they introduced a new one called their Cinetone, which in many ways is their version of YDR. You know, it's very nice. I think there's just some slight I think Cinetone's got slightly more dynamic range, YDR's got slightly more saturated, nicer colours. You know, they each have different strengths, if you like. But now all of a sudden all the Sony users are talking about it as well, and I do think it's going to become a bit more common to not even go anywhere near the log formats for a vast majority of work. I mean, people are starting to talk about battery life. Let's move on to that. But people watching, let me know, do you use log for everything? Do you jump between log, YDR, or Cinetone if you're a Sony user? For some jobs, do you just shoot in Rec 709 rather than YDR? Let us know what you all use. Or maybe you go full hog and go raw. Let us know what actual picture profiles and custom picture profile settings you're using. As we talk about battery life quickly before we finish, Ernesto says, sorry, he didn't mean to derail the conversation. He's more interested in his battery question. I love the R5 C, but in the small form factor, I'd love 30 minutes more battery life. So this is the big compromise, really, with the R5 C. Would you agree?
Yeah, I mean, smaller body obviously means smaller battery.
Yes.
You can, I mean, I guess with the battery grip, fit 2 batteries, so that pretty much double the battery life.
Yep.
But apart from that, you will be looking at external power source. As I said, the USB power bank is probably the best option, because the 2 options that we have from the Canon side, they're more if you shoot in, and basically if the camera is not moving and connected to the mains, yes. Or as you said, with V-Lock options. But yeah, USB, it's cheaper. It's probably the cheapest option.
Yeah.
To just get a USB power bank, and pretty sure there are probably third-party ways of attaching it or securing it to the camera.
When you only think about it in terms of the camera.
Yeah.
I tend to try and push people towards V-Lock batteries, which are more expensive, but it means that they're then an investment which you're going to be able to use well, one for different cameras, but also for lights, for monitors,
Yeah.
for all the rest of it. With a good suite of V-locks, even small mini V-locks that are so popular nowadays, you can power most things. And so for R5C users, if you go for one of those V-locks with a USB-C out, I believe it will do everything that the battery banks will, won't it?
It depends on the power of the V-lock,
USB.
but yeah.
Yes.
But yeah, it should be able to power it and allow it to use obviously the
Use
XLRs and everything. Yeah.
XLRs, everything like that. For example, Swit have got their new Minnow V-lock batteries, which are very good with a, I think they're 140 watt hour, and have got they're quite a small form factor with a USB-C output. There's others that have done it. FX Lion have been good at doing it. The Kinefinity batteries have actually done it with USB-C outputs. So I think those V-locks, rather than a V-lock plate with a dummy battery and stuff, because then, am I right in thinking with a dummy battery, you don't get some of the advantages on some of the camera features that you would get if you went over USB-C into the camera?
No, it's the same as long as it's getting enough power.
Okay.
It's still fine to do the 8K 60. As I said, as long as the camera is getting enough power, it doesn't matter how.
So it's not choosing.
It doesn't have to be USB or the dummy battery, as you said. It's mainly how much power the camera needs to deliver the to allow you to use the XLRs and to do the 8K RAW 60.
Gotcha. Okay, cool. Right, let's jump back in to see what people have said. Emerald is saying he always uses log, preferably in RAW. He also says, can we get a new battery grip maybe for the R5C that uses the batteries from the C70 or R3 that would give us 8K 60p with batteries in camera? That would be a chunky battery grip that used the BP
Oh, the LP19.
PPA batteries.
Oh yeah, the 30 or the yeah.
That would be a chunky battery grip.
I think
that would be an ergonomic nightmare.
I don't think that's something Canon will do.
Maybe. No.
I think it might be a third-party option. But then again, the battery will have to be sending more power for the camera to deliver that. Because obviously we need to look at the bit rate for the 8K 60 as well. Yeah.
The idea went down quite well with Mark. You said yes to an R5C grip that takes BPA 30s, 2 exclamation marks.
It's probably easier to do a battery grip that takes the LP19, which is the battery from the R3.
R3, so just one battery pops into the side of it.
Because that you can probably work around it. But yeah, the BPA 30 or the 60, I genuinely can't see how that fits.
No, that would be very chunky.
Yeah.
Very chunky. Let's see. So a couple of people have chimed up with YDR. Bob UK just says this discussion is very useful on YDR. Mike says I shot a 1.5 hour talk the other day in C-Log 3 with the C200 and the R5C, threw his lookup tables on, started tweaking a bit and thought, why didn't I shoot this in YDR? Completely agree. It just makes your life much easier for things like that. And Barry's actually chimed in with his opinion. People who don't know, Barry works for Canon as well. My personal view is what Carl said. For shooting with controlled lighting, why shoot in a log profile? Where's the dynamic range? And more importantly than where is the dynamic range, I think it's you can control the dynamic range. When you're outside, you can't dim down the sky or whatever.
That's the thing. When you're shooting in a controlled environment, you don't need that.
If something's clipping, I can change it. It's as simple
Outside
as that.
is a different story.
Exactly. Exactly. Okay, I think that is a fantastic place to wrap it up. It's a really interesting talk, and some of the future ones that we're going to be talking about in these live streams. The next two that we're going to be talking about is multicam production. So when you're using several of these cameras together, either in a live environment like we are here, or in maybe we'll talk a bit as well about A camera, B camera type matching. What the best practices are for Canon and how Canon have designed the cameras to be used together for that sort of work, particularly in things like their PTZs, that kind of.
Yeah, so it's like the whole kind of ecosystem using the XF camcorder, so the XF605 with the PTZ, like the CRN 500, C300, C70, so and then being able to basically match the look with minimum basically settings on the cameras. And
interestingly, an interesting experiment might be. Before next week, if you're watching this video after the fact, Let me know which camera you think each of our shots have been. I'll tell you the cameras that we've used. We haven't used any PTZs for this one. I will do for next week. We've used a C70, we've used a C500 Mark II, and we've used the XF605. Let me know if you can tell which of our 3 shots. So there's the wide shot, which we'll cut to now, can we? There we go. There's my close-up, and then there's Mehdia's close-up. Let me know which one you think was using each camera. But yeah, thank you so much for that. I think that's been really useful. Hopefully it's helped people at home choose between cameras, because it must be the question that you get asked the most. Which one should I choose?
It is, and as I said, especially since we launched the R5 C, it's been R5, the R5 C and a C70, which one?
Yeah.
And hopefully today helped those still not sure. And even with the other cameras, like as I said, the R7, the R3, and not forgetting the C300 and the C500 as well. So
absolutely. Well, thank you so much as always for your time. It's been an absolute pleasure, and it's been nice to actually talk in person rather than over a Skype call with dropping in and out.
Much nicer face to face rather than talking to the screen. And the quality is definitely better. I'm pretty sure the viewers will see the difference.
Hopefully.
Yeah, and looking forward to the next 2. Yeah, so next week. Makeup artists, don't forget. And
I'll see if I can find one. Fantastic. Thank you so much. Thank you all for watching at home. And if you've got any questions, just let us know. See you in the next one. Bye.
Action. Good. I need more passion. Camera up.
Turn up the heat and make those embers glow.
Beautiful.
I feel good right now. I'm on fire, yeah. I'm on fire. I'ma do me.
Show you how to build a bonfire right now.
Not just any bonfire, a bonfire.